Hello everybody and welcome to Mishnah Mastery! Come and join our live virtual studio audience over on Zoom, the cream of the crop. We are going to be doing the final chapter of Maseches Beitzah tonight. And we will hopefully be starting the first chapter of Maseches Rosh Hashanah as well. So for now, let's get it up on the screen for you. Here we go. That should be coming through to you now on Zoom. Yep. Thumbs up. Brilliant. Top banana. Let's make sure that our phones are on silent so we don't get disturbed. And we are pretty much good to go. So, chapter 5 of Maseches Beitzah, where we are concerned about a couple of things. Most notably, we are concerned about the amount of tircha, the amount of effort that you might be having to go to on Yom Tov. You've got some produce that's up on the roof. You're leaving it there to dry, as you do in the 21st century. And you now want to bring them in because of the inevitable rainfall that is due to arrive. So the Mishnah is going to tell us that you can do so with minimal effort. But you shouldn't do so with maximal effort. Says the Mishnah in chapter 5, Mishnah 1, Mashilin Peros Derech Aruba. Anyone remember Gladiators? Was it John Fashanu? Aruba! Right? So Mashilin Peros Derech Aruba. Yom Tov. You can lower your fruits through a skylight on Yom Tov because that is going to be significantly easier than trying to schlep it and lug it through windows and doors and all this kind of thing. So if you're lowering it down, that's nice and easy. So the Mishnah says you can do it. Avalo b'Shabbos, but you may not do this on Shabbos because even through a skylight, you may not do this. Continuing with the Mishnah, Umechasim peiros b'kelim mipnei haderech, and you can cover fruits with different vessels, different covers, because of the drips, because of the water which might start dripping on your fruits. So you can cover them. And you can also cover your jugs of wine and your jugs of oil, even though there might not be so much potential loss for these things, you can still cover them. The nosnin kli tachas hadelech b'Shabbos, and you can even put a vessel under your roof to catch anything that's dripping down on Shabbos. You can do that to protect whatever's bottom. If you might have water that's dripping into your house or dripping near your house, whatever it might be. So the Mishnah says you can even cover up, you can even put a vessel, a bucket or whatever, underneath the flow of the leaking water to be able to catch it. That is Mishnah Aleph. Moving on to Mishnah Beis. Says the Mishnah, Kol shechayvin alav mishum shavus, mishum rishus, mishum mitzvah b'Shabbos, chayavin alav b'Yom Tov. Says the Mishnah that anything which is forbidden, mishum shavus, meaning that it's rabbinically been imposed that these things should be rested on Shabbos or on Yom Tov, mishum rishus, even though they might be things that are there's an element of mitzvah to these things, but Rabbanan have forbidden them. These things are also going to be forbidden. And mishum mitzvah, anything which really is a mitzvah but is forbidden to do on Shabbos, chayavin alav b'Yom Tov. They are also going to be forbidden for you to do on Yom Tov as well. Says the Mishnah, these are some of the examples of things which are forbidden because of a Shabbos, because of a rabbinic injunction to have these things resting on Shabbos. Lo olin ba'ilan, a person should not climb up a tree. They can't do it on Shabbos and they shouldn't do it on Yom Tov either, because you might come to cut off a branch. V'lo rochbin al gabe behema, you should not ride an animal, because you might cut off a branch to be able to steer and direct the animal with. You should not swim in the water. Yeah, that's because you might make a flotation device. Well, it's part of the reason, at least. You shouldn't clap. You shouldn't hit your hands on your thigh in a rhythmic fashion, and you shouldn't dance. These things are forbidden rabbinically because you might come to make an instrument. Continues the Mishnah. Ve'eluhein mishum mitzvah. These are the things that the rabbi is forbade, even though they are mitzvah-esque. You still should not do them on Shabbos or on Yom Tov. Says the Mishnah, lo makdishin. You should not consecrate. I'm in the wrong place. Ve'eluhein mishum rishus. These are the things that are forbidden because of rishus, because that they contain mitzvah elements, but you should not do them. And one of the reasons is that you're going to end up wanting to record the things that transpire. And you can't do that. You can't be taking notes and can't be creating documents. So says the Mishnah, lo danin. You should not judge. You should not engage in as a beis din. You should not judge. V'lo mekadshin. You may not betroth, be mekadesh, enter into kedushin with your wife. V'lo cholzin. You should not perform the act of chalitza, which is where a surviving brother. So someone loses their brother, and their brother was married and did not have children. So there's two options biblically. There's the mitzvah of yibum, which is where the surviving brother marries the wife, or there's chalitza, which is where they do not marry each other and they perform a ceremony of separation. You should not do chalitza on Shabbos or on Yom Tov, v'lo miyabmin. And you should not perform yibum, which is to consummate this type of marriage. You should not do that on Shabbos and therefore or on Yom Tov either. Ve'eluhein mishum mitzvah. And these are the things which are forbidden, even though they might be mitzvahs, but we don't do them on Shabbos, we don't do them on Yom Tov. Lo makdishin. We do not dedicate anything to the temple because this looks like business. V'lo ma'arichin. You should not pledge the Torah value of a person to the Beis Hamikdash. And if you have a look at the end of Parashas Bechukosai, you'll see exactly what I mean. Everybody has a biblical value, that once upon a time it was possible to dedicate the value of particular individuals to the Beis Hamikdash. And it was based on age, it was based on gender, based on status, so different people have different values. You should not do these things on Shabbos either. V'lo macharimin. You should not make a vow of cherem. You should not essentially make a vow, the payment of which goes to the temple coffers or to the kohanim. This all looks like commerce, and you should not be doing it. V'lo magbihin terumas and ma'asos. You should not lift up and set aside your tithes, your terumas and your ma'asos. Since you could have done this before Yom Tov, it's too much of a significant tikkun to be doing these things on Yom Tov. It's correcting the produce on Yom Tov when it could have been done beforehand, and so you cannot do these things on Yom Tov. Says the Mishnah, Kol elu b'Yom Tov amru. So these things are not all mentioned in Masechet Shabbos, but all of these things were stated in our Mishnah as being forbidden on Yom Tov. Kal v'chomer b'Shabbos. All the more so, they are forbidden on Shabbos. And the Mishnah finishes off with the position of Beis Shammai. Ein bein Yom Tov l'Shabbos. I think, if I'm not mistaken, we saw these words much earlier on in where were the Ein beins? Oh, anyone remember where were the Ein beins, or have we not seen it yet? Is it in Megillah? And I'm just jumping ahead. Yeah, maybe it's in Megillah, and we haven't got there yet. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of Ein beins. So Ein bein Yom Tov l'Shabbos. There's no difference between Yom Tov and Shabbos. Ela ochel nefesh bilvad. So fundamentally, all things that are forbidden on Shabbos are forbidden on Yom Tov, but the preparation of food is permitted, and that's what makes these two types of days different. So that is Mishnah Beis. Everybody okay for Mishnah Gimel? Moving on to Mishnah Gimel. So from here to the end of the Masechta, we're back to talking about an Erev Techumin. We're talking about the Techum, the boundaries that you'd be able to walk outside of your city. So if you recall, you're allowed to walk 2,000 amos in any direction beyond the perimeter of your city or town, but you have to set up an Erev Techumin, which makes it, the particular point at which you set up an Erev Techumin at the 2,000 amma mark makes that like your dwelling place, and that extends your ability to walk further. So when it comes to things that you own, where does that fall in the ability for these things to be able to move around on Shabbos as well? So says the Mishnah, Habahema v'hakelim karagle habayim. An animal and vessels, they assume, they are incorporated into the maximum distance that the owners can walk. So if you own something, that item is limited by the Techum as well. So the animals and the vessels that we own, they can't go beyond the same distance that the owners are able to walk as well. If a person gives his animal over to his son, or laroeh, or to a shepherd, it says cowherd on the screen there, but the person who's supervising your animals, they can still only nonetheless go as far with these animals as the owner would be entitled to be able to do so. If you have a vessel which is set aside for the use of one of the brothers in the house, so that vessel is going to take on the limits of that individual. And if it is not set aside specifically for an individual, then the item may only go as far as the distance that all of the brothers would be able to go. So if let's say you've got 4 people in the household, one made an Erev in the north, one in the south, one in the east, one in the west, then it can go in all those directions. If not, then it wouldn't be able to go that far at all, because it will be limited to the lowest common denominator. Is that, I don't know if that's really the right usage, but the maximum distance that they could all go, that's as far as you've got, if it hasn't been specifically designated for one person. Says the Mishnah in Mishnah Dalet, Hashoel kli mechaver me'erev Yontiv. If you borrow a vessel from your friend before Yontiv starts, karagle hashoel, that when Yontiv comes in, the maximum distance goes by the person who is borrowing, because you've assumed the ownership, or you've assumed the responsibility for the item before Yontiv, so the maximum distance goes by the person who is borrowing. B'Yom Tov, but if you borrow an item on Yom Tov, karagle hamashil, then it's only going to be able to go as far as the lender, not the borrower. Continues the Mishnah. Ha'isha shesha'ala mechaverta tavlin umayim umelach li'isasa. If a woman borrows from her friend spices, water, or salt for the purpose of making dough, hare elu karagle shtehen. Interestingly, the limits are restricted by the maximum amount that both of them would be able to walk. Since one owns the ingredients and one owns the dough, there is some joint element of ownership over this dough, and so that's why it takes the limit of both of them rather than one of them. Rabbi Yehuda poter b'mayim mipnei she'ein b'hem mamash. But assuming I'm understanding this correctly, according to Rabbi Yehuda, he is saying that out of these ingredients that a woman could borrow, water is pretty insignificant. It's not discernible in the taste, whereas the salt and the spices are. So, if what I'm understanding correctly, the lender is not going to get a say in the maximum distance. If anyone's got something in front of them that can correct me or confirm that. But if a person borrows salt and spices, then it's going to have the maximum distance imposed on how far both of them could theoretically travel. But if it's water that you're borrowing, since it's got no discernible impact on the dough, so according to Rabbi Yehuda, the limit will be imposed by the woman who is borrowing rather than the lender. Now, Mishnah Hey. What we're going to see is that coal is something substantial and therefore has limits imposed, and flames are not substantial, not tangible, not substantive, and therefore there are not going to be restrictions made on flame. Says the Mishnah, Hagacheles karagle habalim. When it comes to coal, that is going to be determined by the owner, how far the owner can go. But with regards to a flame, it can be taken anywhere. So wherever you would be allowed to go, you could take the flame with you. Continues the Mishnah. Gacheles shel hekdesh mo'alim ba. When it comes to a coal which belongs to hekdesh, which belongs to the Beitzah Mikdash, so if a person uses that coal, then they can violate the prohibition of me'ilah, of misappropriating temple items. V'shalheves lo nehelin v'lo mo'alin. V'shalheves, a flame that might have been set aside for use in the Beitzah Mikdash, it might be that you can't derive benefit, but if you do derive benefit and you do make use of it, you do not violate the mitzvah of me'ilah, because it is not a tangible physical item. Hamotzi gacheles lirishus harabim chayav. If you transfer a coal to the public domain, you will be chayav, you will be liable. V'shalheves patur. But if you carry the flame from one rishus to another, then you are going to be patur, because again, there is no physical, tangible object that you are transferring. Continues the Mishnah, bor shel yachid. When it comes to a privately owned pit, karagle hayachid, then you're going to be, it's going to be under the limits, in terms of the boundary, of the owner, of that individual who owns the pit. V'shal anshe osa ha'ir. But if it is a pit that belongs to all of the inhabitants of a city, karagle anshe osa ha'ir. So then it is going to be set to the restrictions of the limits to all of the people in that town. So with regards to the water that you might be able to carry from it, if it's a privately owned well, then it's going to be under the limits of the private owner. If it's under the ownership of everybody in the city, then it's going to be subject to the limits of everybody in the city. V'shel ole bavel, if it is a well which has been set aside for people who are traveling to Eretz Yisrael from Bavel, so then karagle hamamale, then the limits are going to be set in accordance with the people who are filling up. And since there's no, therefore, designated tchum for this water, then you're going to be able to take it wherever these people, these travelers, are able to walk. The reason, by the way, why they had these wells set up for travelers is to discourage the possibility of travelers taking water from privately owned wells, or from wells that are owned by the city and they shouldn't really be taking from. So it was to avoid any of those issues. All right, here we go, guys, with Mishnah Vav. Only 2 Mishnahs left of Maseches Beitzah. Here we go. Okay, so in my notes, by way of introduction, I've written the following. If a person's Erev Techumin ends within the Techum of another city, then they can keep going on until that city. So if a person's 2,000 meters comes to an end, but by that point you're already within the perimeter of the next town or city, then you would be allowed to carry on walking into that city. If a person can't get to the city, they can't give items to someone else to take for him. But if he was able to get to the city, then he could appoint someone else to go and bring those things for him. So with that in mind, let's see if those notes that I've written help us understand Mishnah Vav any clearer. Says the Mishnah, Mi shehayu peirosav be'ir acheres. If a person has fruits in another town or another city, ve'ervu v'nei osa ha'ir lahavi etzlo mi peirosav lo yaviu lo. And the inhabitants of the city have made an eruv in order to be able to bring some of his produce to him. They cannot bring that produce to him. Ve'im eruv hu, but if he has made himself an eruv, then peirosav kamahu, then his fruit is like him. And if that's the case, then people would be able to bring those fruits to him. So, yeah, that pretty much matches what I'd written in my notes a million years ago. That if you weren't able to get to that city, then someone can't bring you that produce, even though they have made an eruv that would reach your domain. But if you have made an eruv, which would then entitle you to get to that city, then others would be able to bring the fruit to you, assuming they had an eruv in place, I guess. Mishnah Zayin, the final Mishnah of Maseches Beitzah. So what we're going to see here is that you can only take things to other people if they have acquired ownership before Yom Tov. Says the Mishnah, Misha zimein eitzlo orchin. If you have invited guests to your home, lo yolichu v'yadam manos, ela im kein zika lahem manosehem erev Yom Tov. So they may not take anything away with them unless they had acquired, or unless it had been apportioned to them. They had acquired the ownership before Yom Tov. Ein mashkin v'shoichatin es hamidbarios. You may not feed, give drink to wild animals, and you may not slaughter wild animals. Aval mashkin v'shoichatin es habaisos. But you can give water to, and you can slaughter domestic animals. What are domestic animals and what are midbarios, wild animals? So the wild animals are animals which would typically spend the night in the wilderness, out in the desert, or out in the middle of nowhere, beyond the perimeter and the proximity of the town. So they might show up at your house during the day, but they don't spend the night anywhere near your property, and so they cannot be considered prepared and mukhan with regards to slaughtering on Yom Tov. But with domestic animals, which do dwell and do live in or near your home, then those things can be considered prepared and set aside for use on Yom Tov, in which case you can feed them, and in which case you can slaughter them as well. It says the Mishnah, to finish off, Elu hein baisos. These are domesticated household animals. Halanos ba'er, those that spend the night in the town, near to where you live. Midbarios, but when it comes to wild animals, pasture animals, halanos ba'afar. These are animals who would spend the night, translated there as pasture ground. I've got translated in my notes here as marshy terrain. Either way, it's too far away to be considered prepared for your use on Yom Tov. So, all that's left to say is the three words, which I encourage you all to say along with me. They're not on the screen, so just repeat after me. Salik Maseches Beitzah. Salik Maseches Beitzah. Salik Maseches Beitzah. Mazel tov, everybody, on completing Maseches Beitzah. Fantastic. But we don't stop there, and we go straight into Maseches Rosh Hashanah. And of course, the first two chapters deal with Rosh Chodesh. So we're not going to be touching on the mitzvahs of Rosh Hashanah per se until a little later on. But we're dealing first and foremost really with the halachas of Rosh Chodesh. Although the first Mishnah doesn't really deal specifically with Rosh Chodesh. And from different places in Tanakh, we see that there may be more Rosh Hashanahs than we might otherwise be used to. And the Mishnah actually says, Arba'a Rosh Hashanah Haim. There are 4 dates in the Jewish calendar which are considered the turning point in the calculation of years. So different concepts, different mitzvahs, they will have different cutoff points during the Jewish year, and therefore the way in which you calculate the length of a year will vary for these different concepts. So let's see if any of what I've just said will help us understand the following Mishnah. Arba Rosh Hashanah Hen. There are 4 heads of the year. There are 4 dates in the calendar which we would consider Rosh Hashanah for different things. Says the Mishnah, Be'echad B'Nisan, the first day of Nisan is considered Rosh Hashanah, it's considered the turning point in the calculation of years for the purpose of Lamlachim V'la Regalim, for the purpose of kings and for the purpose of Regalim. What do we mean? So when it comes to the way in which we would calculate the length of a king's reign, the date on which a new year would be used to calculate the length of the reign would be the first of Nisan. So if a king had come to throne, which is not a euphemism for going to the toilet, but if a king took the throne a day before the first of Nisan, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I saw the number 44 days somewhere, but I don't know if that was with regards to this. But the point is that if he had come to throne before the first of Nisan, even if it was just a matter of days before the first of Nisan, then once the first of Nisan hits, he will have already considered to have been sitting on the throne for a year. So he may have only actually been on the throne for a couple of days, but if that hits the first of Nisan, so now he is already entering into his 2nd year of his reign. So that's the cutoff point, that's the turning point for the reign of kings. V'la Regalim. When it comes to Regalim, which are the foot festivals, so the first of Nisan is the turning point. So that means as follows. If a person made a promise, made a neder, that he was going to bring a korban for Pesach, and he missed bringing that korban on Pesach, so he actually has until Sukkot to be able to bring that korban. But if he made his promise after Pesach, then he has till the following Pesach to bring it without violating, basically missing the opportunity to bring that korban. And so Nisan is that turning point when it comes to how long he has for bringing this particular korban. I think that is accurate. Continues the Mishnah. Be'echad be'elul. The first day of Elul is the Rosh Hashanah for L'maaseh Behema. If you have animals which are born on different days and you need to allocate Maaseh, you need to tithe out your animals and take 1/10 of all of your animals. So what is the cutoff point from one year to the next? The answer is the first day of Elul. If you have animals born before the first day of Elul and animals born after the first day of Elul, they will have to be tithed separately. You can't just say, oh, hey, well, they're already born a couple of days apart, couple before Elul, couple after Elul, so we'll just put them all together and I'll tithe from that. The Mishnah is telling us that if they're born either side of the first of Elul, they will have to be tithed separately. Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon Omrim, Be'echad B'Tishrei, they disagree, and they say that actually the cut-off date for animals is also Echad B'Tishrei. It's also the first day of Tishrei. I say also because the very next date that we have is Echad B'Tishrei. So according, by the way, to Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, they would actually say that there's 3 key dates in the calendar for Rosh Hashanah. So, Be'echad B'Tishrei, the first day of Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah Lashanim. Well, that's the one that we're all familiar with. That is the Rosh Hashanah vis-a-vis the years, the Jewish calendar. What are we now? 5, 7, 8, 2. 2020 was a washout. So what year are we in now? Okay, so no, we're in 5781. So so the first of Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah for the way in which we count our years, and Velashmitim. It is the cutoff date or the starting date for Shemitah. So our 7-year cycles, that's calculated by the first of Tishrei. Velayovlos, and when it comes to the Jubilee, when we count 7 cycles of 7, and then we have the 50th year of the Jubilee, the way in which we know which year we're in is calculated by the first of Tishrei. Lanatia velayarakos. When it comes to Natia, when it comes to things which are planted in the ground, which we're not allowed to benefit from for the first 3 years because of the mitzvah of Orla. So how do we know how long these years are? Well, we time it by the first of Tishrei, meaning that if you plant something a couple of days before the first of Tishrei, within I think that's the 44-day threshold that I was thinking of. If you plant it within 44 days of the first of Tishrei, then that will already be considered a year, and then the first of Tishrei indicates the second year of that 3-year counting. And V'liyarakos as well, when it comes to pickings before and after, with regards to how you tithe, can you combine them all together? The first of Tishrei is going to be that cutoff point. But Echad B'Shvat, here's another one that we'll be familiar with. The first day of Shvat, Rosh Hashanah Le'ilan, is the new year for trees, Kedivrei Beis Shammai, and as we all know, Beis Hillel Omrim, Beis Hillel say B'Chamisha Asaba. That Beis Hillel say it's the 15th day of Shvat. That tells us what the new year for the trees should be. And that again is to help us understand when we should be taking tithes from our trees. I think, is that right? Yeah. With regards to Maaseh, with regards to tithing the fruit from the trees, it's going to depend on which side of the 15th of Shvat they have been plucked. Moving on then to Mishnah Base, says the Mishnah, Ba'arba prakim ha'olam nidon. At 4 times, 4 periods in the year, the world is judged for different things. But Pesach ala Tvua, Hashem judges produce at Pesach time. But at Seres shall Peros ha'ilam, Hashem judges the fruits of the tree and how productive they will be. He judges that at Shavuos. But Rosh Hashanah, on our Rosh Hashanah, on the first of Tishrei, Kol ba'i ha'olam ovrim lefanav kivnei maron. All of the people of the world pass before him like kivnei maron. That's interesting. Like a division of a soldier, like of soldiers. Why did I think kivnei maron meant like sheep passing by a shepherd? What do you have in your books?
We said sheep passing by shepherds.
Okay. Well, just for reference there, and you can see why I'm confused. The screen translates it as like divisions of soldiers. But yeah, I thought it was like sheep passing by the shepherd. Shnei Amar quotes the pasuk in Tehillim, Hayotze Yachad Libam Hamavin El Kol Ma'aseihin. He who fashions the hearts of them all, who discerns all they're doing, indicating to us that Hashem is very much caring and is very particular over every single one of his creatures. And finally, says the Mishnah, Uvechag nidunin al hamayim. And on Sukkot, they are judged, we are judged, with respect to rain, to the water that will come to the world in that year. Says the Mishnah, in Mishnah Gimel. So, how did the process of announcing a new month work? So they would have messengers who would disperse, who would travel outside of Yerushalayim, outside the proximity of the Beis Hamikdash, to be able to inform everybody in Eretz Yisrael and in the diaspora that it was Rosh Chodesh. So here's the thing: after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, they still had to send out these messengers to inform about when Rosh Chodesh was. So when there was a Beis Hamikdash, they would do this every single month. But after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, it was done only at particular times of the year, and they chose these times because the rest of the world would still need to be getting Yom Tov and fast days in the right place, on the right day. So, Al Shisha Chadashin Al Shluchin Yotzin, on 6 months of the year, after the Beis Hamikdash had been destroyed, the messengers would still go out to announce when the new month was. Al Nisan Mipnei HaPesach, they would go out in the month of Nisan so that everybody could be sure that they were getting Pesach in the right place. Al Av Mipnei HaTanis, they would go out in the month of Av to make sure that everybody knew when the first day of Av was, so that they could know when the 9th day of Av was, so that they would know when Tisha B'Av is in the right place. Al Elul, they would send out messengers in the month of Elul, Mipnei Rosh Hashanah, in order that everybody would be getting to Rosh Hashanah on the same day. Al Tishrei, and they would announce the month of Tishrei, Mipnei Takanas Hamoados. They would, even though they knew when Rosh Hashanah was coming, they would still go out to announce the month of Tishrei because they would want everyone to feel calm and feel settled, that they knew when Yom Kippur and Sukkot were coming, so that they could, so that those fixtures could be in the correct place as well. Al Kislev Mipnei Chanukah, they would send messengers out in the month of Kislev so that people could be sure when Chanukah was coming. Val Adar Mipnei HaPurim, and they would send messengers out in the month of Adar so that people would know when Purim was on the horizon. Because Shehaya Beis Hamikdash Kayam, but when the Beis Hamikdash stood, Yotzin Afal Iyar Mipnei Pesach Katan, they would go out even in the month of Iyar so that people would know when Pesach Sheni was coming. If they had missed the opportunity to bring a Korban Pesach in the month of Nisan, in the correct month for Pesach, then they would at least know when to come for Pesach Sheni, for the Pesach Katan, as it calls it here in the Mishnah, to come a month later to bring their Korban Pesach then. We move on to Mishnah Dalet. So when people would need to testify about the new month, they would be allowed to travel to the Beis Hamikdash, even if it would mean that they would be violating Shabbos. So that was how important it was to get the message. But when the Beis Din would notify about Rosh Chodesh, then these messengers would never violate Shabbos to be able to pass this message on. But people, as I said, coming to testify, they would be allowed to be Machal al Shabbos if it was Nisan, so that they would be getting Pesach in the right place, and if it was Tishrei, for getting Yom Kippur and Sukkot in the right place. Because as I said, in order for Rosh Chodesh, the new month, to be established, you would have witnesses coming to the Beis Hamikdash to testify that they had seen the new moon, and then the Beis Din would spread that information out from that point. Says the Mishnah, Al Shnei Chadashim Mechalalin Es HaShabbos. On 2 months, they would be allowed to violate Shabbos. That is talking about the messengers. No, that is talking about the witnesses. Which one, Paul? What do you reckon? The witnesses. Sorry, the witnesses who saw the moon, they would be permitted to violate Shabbos in order to come and testify to the Beis Din. So, says the Mishnah, on account of 2 of these months, they would be allowed to violate Shabbos. Al Nisan, on the month of Nisan, to be able to get Pesach in the right place. Al Tishrei, and on Tishrei to be able to get Yom Kippur and Sukkot in the right place. Shebahen hashluchin yotzin l'Surya, because on those months the messengers would go forth to Syria, meaning outside of Eretz Yisrael. Uvahen mesaknin es hamoados, and on those dates the festivals would be fixed into the calendar. Because Shehaya Beis Hamikdash Kayam, and when the Beis Hamikdash stood, Mechalanin af al kulan. This is why I was getting confused. Fine. When the Beis Hamikdash stood, so what we were seeing before was after the destruction. I apologize. When the Beis Hamikdash stood, however, they would violate Shabbos on all of the months, mipnei takanas hakorban, because they needed to get Rosh Chodesh on the right day so that they could be getting the sacrifice of Rosh Chodesh on the right day. Continuing with Mishnah Hey. Bein Shanira Ba'alil, Bein Shalonira Ba'alil, whether the new moon was seen clearly or not seen clearly, the witnesses, Mechalalin Alav Shabbos, the witnesses would still profane Shabbos and violate Shabbos to be able to get their message to the Beitzah Mikdash and come and testify. Rabbi Yossi says, Im Nira Ba'alil, Ein Mechalalin Alav Shabbos. Interestingly, we didn't hold like this, but Rabbi Yossi says that if the moon was presenting clearly, then the witnesses would not violate Shabbos to be able to get to the Beitzah Mikdash and testify, because Rabbi Yossi would be comfortable in the knowledge that so many people near to the Beitzah Mikdash would have seen the moon. So why risk it? Why violate Shabbos to be able to come and deliver that message if you can be sure that so many people will have been able to get to the Beitzah Mikdash without violating Shabbos? As I said, I don't believe the halacha was actually like Rabbi Yossi in practice. And actually, it was important that everybody should still go and testify. Ma'aseh, says the Mishnah, in Mishnah Vav, Ma'aseh she'avru yoseh me'arbayim zug. It happened once that more than 40 pairs of witnesses were on their way to the Beis HaMikdash to testify. Ve'ikvan Rabbi Akiva belud, and Rabbi Akiva detained them. It wasn't worth them going all that way to continue because there were so many sets of witnesses going to the Beis HaMikdash. So, in light of that, and what I was saying before about Rabbi Yossi's position, Shalach lo Rabban Gamliel. Rabban Gamliel sent a message to him saying, Im ma'akev ataysa rabbim nimtzeisa machshila le'asin lavo. If you prevent people from coming now to provide testimony, then you're going to put a stumbling block in front of people in the future. Because everyone's just going to say, what do I need to go for? There's bound to be others that have gone, so I'll just hang back. I won't violate Shabbos. I won't even bother, even if I wasn't violating Shabbos. I just won't go to the Beis HaMikdash because I will know that so many other people have gone. So that was the concern, and that's why there was this this understanding that you just have to let people go to the Beis HaMikdash. Even if they're flocking to be able to testify, just allow it. We accept all of these witnesses because it's so imperative that people don't get disheartened and don't feel like their testimony is not welcome there. That being said, there are rules when it comes to witnesses, and typically people who are related to each other would not be allowed to testify in court cases together. They couldn't be valid witnesses. We see traces of this now, even with things like marriage witnesses are not necessarily supposed to be krovin. They're not supposed to be related to the people on whom they are testifying. So says the Mishnah in Mishnah Zayin, how far does that halacha extend when it comes to testifying about Rosh Chodesh? Says the Mishnah, Av uveno shira'u es HaChodesh yelchu. If a father and a son, who are otherwise known in halacha as krovin, they are direct relatives, so theoretically they shouldn't be testifying together, they should nonetheless go to the Beis HaMikdash together. Says the Mishnah though, lo shemitzarfin zeh and zeh, not so that they can combine for testimony together as a set of two independent witnesses, ella, rather, she'in yipaser echad mehem, but if one of them was to be invalidated for whatever reason, yitztaref hasheni imacher, then the other one could at least combine with another witness to be able to testify together. So how might they be disqualified? Well, they might just give the wrong answers to the Beis Din, and therefore the testimony won't work to activate the declaration of Rosh Chodesh. But you've at least got the second guy there. They haven't said, well, listen, we're related, so why don't you just go and I'll stay back. So actually the Mishnah was saying both should go, just in case both could be helpful to being able to testify about the new moon. Rabbi Shimon says, Av uvno, a father and son, v'chol akrovin, and any relative, Rabbi Shimon says that actually they could all testify together. And the halacha of krovin, the halacha of immediate relations, immediate relatives, doesn't apply to the testimony of Rosh Chodesh. Rabbi Yossi said, Maaseh b'Tovia harofe. There was a story with Tovia the doctor, Tobias the doctor. Shera'a es hachodesh b'Yerushalayim. He saw the new moon in Jerusalem. Who? He saw it, Uvna, his son, Va'avdo Meshachrar, and his freed servant, his freed slave. All three of these people saw the new moon together. V'kiblu haKohanim oso v'yesbeno. And the Kohanim accepted his and his son's testimony, Ufaslu es abdo, but they disqualified the slave's testimony. Ukeshebaru lifnei beisin, but when they came before the beisin to testify, Kiblu oso v'es abdo, they actually accepted his testimony along with his freed slave, because a freed slave should be able to be a valid witness. Upaslo es beno, but they disqualified his son on account of the fact that he was a karov, he was an immediate relation to the father, to Tovia Harofe. So it seems that practically, when it came to the practical application of the halacha, it was seen that they disagreed with Rabbi Shimon, and actually they accepted, they did not accept the testimony of relations together, and they instead accepted the testimony of the Tovia Harofe and his servant who had been freed and was therefore a kosher witness. On to Mishnah Ches. Who are the people who are invalid as witnesses? So says the Mishnah, Eluhein Hapsulim. These are the people who would be disqualified from testifying. Hamasachik Bakubia. People who are dice players, prolific gamblers. They are rejected and disqualified from testimony. Malve Baribis. People who loan out on with ribis, on interest. They give out loans on interest. Interestingly, we're talking about rabbinic interest, not biblical interest, and we're talking about rabbinic disqualifications here, not biblical disqualifications. But that is another category of someone who gives, who would be disqualified. Someone who lends out with interest, they would be disqualified. Umafricheyonim, pigeon racers. Also a kind of inappropriate form of gambling. The Sochare Shavis, people who do business with produce which should otherwise be onerous during Shavis, during the 7th year of the tithing cycle, when produce should be onerous. If a person goes ahead and does business with that produce and sells it for profit, he will be disqualified from testifying about the new moon. Va'avadim and slaves are also disqualified from being kosher witnesses. Zeh haklal, this is the rule, says the Mishnah. Kol edus she'ein ha'isha kasher la, af hein einon kasherim la. If a person is going to be disqualified, no, one second. My apologies. So the rule is that anything that a woman would not be able to testify about, and there are things which women can testify about, but anything that they are not able to testify about, so afhein einon ksherim la. So too, all of these categories that we've just listed, they would also not be qualified to be able to testify about these things either. Says the Mishnah in Mishnah Test, the final Mishnah of our chapter and our final Mishnah for this evening. Mi shara'a es hachodesh ve'eno yachol lahalech. If a person saw the new moon and they want to be able to testify, but they can't get there, they can't go, they can't walk to Jerusalem, molichin oso ala chamor, they can bring him on a donkey, even on Shabbos, afilu bamita, or even on a stretcher. Ve'im tzodeh lahem lokchin biyadam maklos. And if they are likely to be ambushed, then they can take with them sticks to be able to defend themselves. Even though they're carrying, they can take those sticks along to be able to defend themselves. Ve'im ha'isa derech rechoka, and if it's a long journey to be able to get to the base of Mikdash, Lokhin biyadam mazonos. Then you can take provisions with you to be able to eat along the way. Sha'al mahalach laila vayom mechalelines hashabbos v'yotzin le'edas hachodesh. Because even if they had to go and leave that night and travel that night and the whole day through Shabbos to be able to get to the Beis Hamikdash, they would be able to do that and violate Shabbos in order to be able to testify about the new moon in the Beis Hamikdash. Shne'emar, as it says in the pasuk in Vayikra, these are the appointed times of the Lord, which you shall proclaim at their appointed time. And the fact that it says B'mo Adam, at their appointed time, even if you are having to do this on Shabbos, even if the appointed time is on Shabbos, you would be able to make that journey and take what you needed along with you to be able to get there safely and in good health. So, Mazel Tov everybody on completing the first chapter of Rosh Hashanah, and as we said, Mazel Tov before for completing Maseches Beitzah, and that's all for this week. So join us for the after party now on Zoom. Otherwise, we'll see you next week. Take care, everyone.